The privilege of citizenship. That's the focus of tonight's angle.
Landmark oral arguments moments away on birthright citizenship. President Trump en route to that building.
We expect President Trump to leave any minute now to go to the Supreme Court. He is going to sit in.
I loved it. President Trump attends the Supreme Court oral arguments in the big birthright citizenship case this morning. And this underscored the stakes involved. And the liberal freakout was telling.
It seems like there's a potential he was trying to, intimidate this U.S. Supreme Court.
He decided to go sit and watch the Supreme Court. It does feel that way because it's an intimidation. If you look at...
Ooh, he's sitting, watching. Ridiculous. But if there's any oral argument for President Trump to attend, it was this one. After all, what's more important than the question of what constitutes citizenship? Is it found in the anecdote described by author Peter Schweitzer in his book Silent Coup? As we sang Auld Lang Syne in the early morning of January 1st, 2025, the first American newborn of the year arrived to much fanfare and celebration. But this time, the baby was the progeny of Chinese citizens, and the mother had intentionally traveled to give birth on American soil so that the child would automatically be granted U.S. citizenship, a practice known as birth tourism. When such children turn 21, they can also apply for resident status for both of their parents. Now, although birth tourism data is not tracked by the feds, it should be, a Pew Center analysis found that in the year 2023, a staggering 320,000 babies were born to mothers of unauthorized immigrants or otherwise not U.S. citizens. So 9% of the total number of babies born in the U.S. So the birthright citizenship foolishness has also spawned a growing surrogacy scandal nationwide, where wealthy foreign elites essentially use domestic wombs to birth American citizens. One egregious case involves two Chinese nationals living in California who are creating their own little army of commies. So far, 26 and counting, all born to surrogates on American soil. The couple, by the way, owns $100 million in U.S. real estate holdings, and all the children will get U.S. passports thanks to so-called birthright citizenship. There are also allegations there of physical abuse.
Police in California raided the home of Gojun Shuin and Sylvia Zhang over allegations of possible child abuse. The couple's 21 children, mostly surrogate-born, were taken into state custody as an investigation began.
Then they found there were 5 more over in Virginia. It's totally insane. Another Chinese billionaire exploiting birthright citizenship is said to have 100 kids by surrogacy. Zhu Bo is a video game exec, but this is a dangerous game for the United States. Since long before he became president, private citizen Donald Trump railed against the logic of this, conferring U.S. citizenship on those who are the children of illegal aliens or non-citizens. Crazy town. And in 2015, he went on to make this issue a cornerstone of his first campaign.
What happens is they're in Mexico, they're going to have a baby, they move over here for a couple of days, they have the baby. You don't walk over the border for one day and all of a sudden we have another American citizen. It doesn't work that way. Mexico doesn't do it, other places don't do it, very few places do it. We're the only place just about that's stupid enough to do it.
Well, he was right. So the focus here is on the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment, which was ratified in 1868, roughly 11 years after the landmark Supreme Court decision Dred Scott versus Sanford. Now, remember, that denied citizenship to African Americans. So the relevant part of the amendment reads as follows. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. So the key phrase is subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Trump's Solicitor General John Sowers cited the congressional record from 1866.
One of the strongest statements of this is Senator Trumbull's statement that I quoted at the beginning, where he says, he's asked, well, what does that mean, subject to the jurisdiction thereof? And he says, it means not owing allegiance to anybody else. That is what it means.
Another interesting note, Senator Jacob Howard, one of the other co-sponsors of the Citizenship Clause, clarified what categories of people would be covered. saying that this will not, of course, include persons born in the United States who are foreigners and aliens. Now, that would seem to help the Trump administration's case here, but nevertheless, a majority of the justices did not seem inclined to limit or circumscribe birthright citizenship. Now, remember, there was no immigration law when the amendment was ratified, so there was no concern about illegal immigration back then. But now the abuses are widespread, and they're potentially catastrophic for the republic. This was sour sparring at one point with the Chief Justice.
We're in a new world now, as Justice Alito pointed out, to where 8 billion people are one plane ride away from having a child who's a U.S. citizen.
Well, it's a new world. It's the same Constitution.
It is, and as Justice Scalia said, I think in the case that Justice Alito was referring to, you've got a constitutional provision that addresses certain evils, and it should be extended to reasonably comparable evils. He said that about statutory interpretation. I think the same principle applies here.
Now, a critical point also, the administration is not asking the court to overturn the 1898 precedent in the Wong Kim Ark case, where, in that case, the court held that a child born in San Francisco to Chinese parents was a citizen. But instead, the administration wants to limit birthright citizenship because, again, in that case, this is key, the parents were both legal permanent residents or domiciled in America. But Justice Barrett did not seem convinced.
If you're looking at parents, and if you're looking at parents' domicile, then you have to adjudicate both residence and intent to stay. What if you don't know who the parents are?
I think there are marginal cases. That one, I think, has the benefit of being addressed in 1401F, where it talks about
Yeah. But what about the Constitution?
Under the Constitution, domicile is a constitutional standard in all kinds of other situations.
Well, and it's hard.
But then, well, it's hard. A lot of things are hard, yeah. But then there were questions or comments from the most junior member of the court, specifically about the legal status of the parents.
Let me just ask you about why we wouldn't see in the 14th Amendment anything about parental allegiance. Several of my colleagues have talked about the fact that your view of this turns on what the status of the parents are and not the child, as would the born in the United States view of it. Can you help us understand why we wouldn't expect to see a mention of parents in the text of this amendment?
I think it was well understood that, for example, children cannot, newborns cannot form domiciles.
Okay. I hate when my kids say duh, but duh. I mean, does Justice Jackson even read the briefs? Or has she even read the Constitution, for that matter? Regardless of the ultimate outcome here, I'm glad that more Americans are seeing or hearing how our government really works or fails to work on these issues. Because as it stands right now, there is not a core base of elected power in our country that thinks your children have any more rights or any more protections than the child of a migrant born here the day after she crossed the border, her mother crossed the border illegally. A Congress that cared more about preserving the value of American citizenship, it would have clarified the citizenship clause long ago. Obviously, our forefathers did not anticipate that our government would be stupid enough to allow America to be invaded by hostile or fraudulent forces. So now, well, it's probably going to be up to the state or the federal government, Congress. Oh, good luck with that. The DOJ do everything in their power to crack down on these birthright abuses in any way they can. So if someone's intent in traveling here is to have a baby here, it's not for tourism and it's not for business. That should always be prosecuted as fraud. And obviously, it's imperative that the president not back off deporting as many illegals as possible, as fast as possible, because unless the court upholds his executive order, there will be tens of millions of new citizens born to the illegal immigrants who are here, who will then be entitled to all our benefits, schools, health care, etc., including voting rights. And we all know that's the holy grail for the Democrats. And that's the angle.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.